All right, I thought I'd make a point about the knock-on effects of a god that restrains himself, possibly, versus a limited by external factors, pantheistic god, and a god that is all-consuming, totally claimed everything, and everything's perfect, hunky-dory, and we're not needed for anything, literally, and we can't do anything for anyone or God because he's got everything and he provides everything, and it's like whatever. And basically, a pantheistic God and the intermediary between literally doesn't need or want anything from us, God. You can add things to their setup. You can always go like, I'm needed for something. You know, I can participate. I can provide, and so on. The God that provides everything and doesn't need anything and is good enough for everyone, and no one needs to do anything, um, is a God that is very effeminate, um, in a sense, and not maybe not even effeminate, but very babying and so on, like a baby caretaker, and it's like it's not just like childish, it's like infantilizing to the individual who wants to follow said God. And a lot of people kind of gravitate towards a God where you don't need to do anything and it's just good enough. And I've been praying to God and possibly getting signs from Him and so on. And He's basically been saying that to me. And I've been rebelling against it, even if it's a sign from God, because I've been like trying to provide value to other people and help them out and like possibly give insight into the world and so on. Maybe I'm not very good at it. Maybe I'm a total failure, but at the same time, I still have to try to be valuable to my society on some level as a jobless autistic schizo. And the in-between God, the one that's restrained himself but allows us to participate in a meaningful way on some level, while still providing the loaded dice so that we win as long as we throw them. Um, sort of is what I imagine God's doing with my life personally. I mean, it could be a total failure on my part, and I'm just being condemned to hell or something. But because I'm living through kind of a hellish existence at the moment. It's gotten a little better lately, but at the same time, it's like it's not very good. It's a, kind of dreary, and it gets me down a little bit. But believing in a God that restrains himself is a lot better than believing in a God that babies us, or a God that literally, physically, spiritually, manifestly cannot be more than um, a limited, basically Marvel's Thor or something like that, basically, or Loki or Odin or something like that. A pantheon god. But both of those last two have the option of, hey, I can provide. I believe in your spirit and manner and theme and trend of things, but I can add my strength to yours. And we can unite and become stronger, and this will drive our way of life forwards further in one and for all, in one for all, sort of. And when the in one is already provided, uh, then it feels almost like there's no point to you or something, right? Um, and this is kind of what gets at my sort of pseudo warrior ethos, because I am a bit of in the past I was a pretty big scrapper, and like, I kind of learned God was angry with me for doing wrong things when I was a scrapper, and I was like, oh, whoops, and I like tried to follow my sword literally like 46 times. And there's a certain degree of like, okay, if I do wrong, at least it's me doing wrong, and if I do right, at least it's me doing right. And I was like, okay, I can actually attribute something to myself, and so on. But if you can't attribute anything to yourself, then it's like, what is your identity, right? Rootless, sort of nobody. You're nothing, literally. When you clearly exist on some level. And it gets into Cthulhu horror mythos of like the dreaming god that when he wakes up will all just poof and disappear and so on. So I understand the whole Christian sense of Lovecraftian horror in regards to the Christian God to some extent, basically. Even if they're like, oh, no, 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 God is the most stable thing ever and so on, he'll never do that to you. The fact that he could says to me like, oh, that's not very safe. And then they mention after that you have to have trust in God. And it's like, okay, so God could annihilate me at any time, but he hasn't for a long time. But he wants me to put my trust in him and follow him and do his will, because at least in the middle ground, there is something I can do, and I am someone, but the exact mechanism is a little confused to me personally. I think maybe I'm someone because God believes in me or something, or wills it or something, not because I exist of myself on some level higher than the other beings in an atheist world. And that's one of the reasons why secular atheism is so appealing, is because you're not just wishable away. You can't just be poofed out of existence unless someone works really hard and puts all their knowledge and puts billions of dollars into a nuclear weapon and then sends it off and so on. So there's a lot of effort to poof you away if someone does, and it might not be cost efficient, and there's a little bit of safety in that, and so on. And the God that restrains himself is basically the God that could baby everyone, but chooses not to. And so it's like, okay, there's a little solidity in the fact that he basically knew we'd slaughter each other and rape each other and torture each other and kill each other and like do horrible things to each other, and he still decided that was worth it for creating something with a dramatic struggle against evil for the good. And it's like, okay, that's a little more solid, because it means that he made the decision knowing everything bad that would ever happen that's supposedly against his will and so on. And he allowed it for the sake of making something that means something to us. Goodness. True goodness based on true freedom of choice and so on. But it feels like a video game almost, in a way, this theology, in a sense, where it's like an artificial environment created by someone else for our own amusement, almost. You know what I mean? And the babying God, the infantilizing God that provides everything like the Garden of Eden, except perfection in a way that just is like, it's like you don't have to do anything seriously hard or anything like that. It's like, okay, does that really speak to anyone? Maybe a baby, maybe a little kid or something. Maybe they think about it like that. Yeah. But apparently, God will intervene, and eventually he'll do something similar to the babying in a sense, but it'll be more like childhood's challenges that everyone goes through, and it'll be adventurous, and we'll be more ourselves than before. So it's like, okay, that's a promise. I can get behind that one. And then there's that whole, is there pain in heaven? And some people say, yes, there will be, but it won't be suffering. And basically the idea is, if you work out really hard and you get muscles and stuff like that, a lot of people will say, like, initially it's really painful, but like, and then the pain becomes kind of almost an addiction or something, because you know you're working on yourself, and it's like the dopamine receptors are letting loose when you're working out, and it's like you got the pain and the pleasure at the same time. And it's not like a Slaneshi sort of Warhammer 40k Chaos God pain and pleasure. It's like a wholesome sort of standing between the two positions of the yin and yang, like Wheel of Fortuna, the Wheel of Fortune, where you're in the middle of a wheel, and the top of the wheel is pure bliss and excess, and then there's fall, and then there's down in the dumps in the gutter, and then there's rise again, and you're in the center of all of that. So it's like, okay, that working out kind of represents that physically and bodily and so on. And and it's like, okay, you know. But for me personally, at the moment at least, the Pantheon God sort of feels more inspirational in a way, because for whatever reason, I swear to God, this self-restraining God who could baby me but doesn't, is like occasionally like, you're going to hell, you're the Antichrist, you should end yourself, and so on. And it's like, okay, like how do I deal with that, you know? And like, are all my struggles just a video game to God, and so on, you know? Like, am I struggling because he wants to make fine art, you know? Or am I suffering because he wants to make fine art out of life? You know, and then there's times when I look back on it and I'm like, okay, when I was seriously going through that whole like accusatory thing from what I thought was God, you know, I was like really excited at the introduction of God into my life in a way that I noticed. And then the effect wore off because I didn't get to receive the, you know, it's like, I mean, I'm kind of an autistic schizo, Spurg, but like, I worked hard to understand the nature of God, and I've been obsessed with it for like 2 years in Christianity specifically, and like before that I was doing my best to think through God metaphysically through his signs that I thought he was giving me and so on. And he led me to Christianity somewhat, not entirely necessarily at the moment, but you know, there's that. So one of the things I'm tentatively guessing, based on trusting the authority of other people who have had experiences with God in the Bible, in person, in like the preachers and pastors and people mentioning the dark night of the soul, and Saint Silouan of Athonite Audio, chapter 10, spiritual trials, mentioning even saints go through purging by Satan, allowed by God, to purge us of our pride and looking down on others and so on, is you know, it's a pretty fun video game when you get to the meaningful stuff, but there's a lot of dead work or drudgery and so on. And you know, I'm not living in very good living conditions right now, and it's like I've kind of given up on the sort of like the seriously monkish like friendship with God in the sort of intellectual sphere, in a way. Not entirely, I'm still driven by it, but like it's not enough for my desires anymore, you know, like this intellectual pursuit of God just isn't good enough for me. I want the good life, I want riches, I want fame, I want comfort, I want relaxation, I want progress that I can notice with having kids and a wife and stuff like that. And I want away from this place of so many people dying in so short a time, and like the constant bothering of people of me for cigarettes, which I don't mind giving exactly because I feel bad for them and so on, and I want to do my best to help people out and so on. But like at the same time, it's like this situation where I'm useless to most people in any serious sense, it seems like. And it just eats me up inside, and I think like my intellectual capacity will be better served if more people listen to me, maybe, or something like that. Because I've got some things to say, because I've done some serious thinking on these topics. And like part of me is a little worried that I'm useless completely because like I put my stock in my intellectual capacities and my intellectual honesty and so on. And like no one pays attention to it. And I know that's sort of bitching and moaning about my life and like, you know, but like at the same time, it's like I really thought that if I was going to be good at anything, I would be good at thinking things through and maybe coming up with some insights into how the world works spiritually through Christianity or psychologically or um, good politics and so on, or philosophy maybe. But I noticed Gregory B. Sadler does philosophy just fine. There's a bunch of political commentators that are just fine, and so on. And the only thing I can possibly provide that's unique is my experience with God in terms of what I've experienced and like my position on miracles and so on. But I'm also worried that it's like, what if I speak my perceptions of my experiences in a convincing way and it turns out to be absolutely wrong, and it causes people to uh, enter a dead end spiritually because they can't get out of that way of thinking when they made some progress. Sort of like those the sower and the parable of the sower with the seeds that grow a little bit and then they like die off because they're in rocky ground or whatever or something like that. And it's like, okay, you know. And then even if I were to manage to pull off something interesting and unique and like possibly correct or more correct or something, the fact is no one pays attention to me. So it's like, you know, like I feel like I think I understand a little how Nietzsche must have felt, you know? Um, yeah. So what good is having spiritual wisdom or insights if I do have it, if no one pays attention to me? Yeah. And that's the thing. The only thing I can think of that I could possibly add to humanity, other than giving the occasional cigarette to hobos, which isn't very much, it's a band-aid on a gaping chest wound of inadequacy and ineffective and inefficient management of society's resources by socialists, um, is is a little bit of charity, you know. And I'm watching these people die off in misery, and it's like I can't stop it, you know. So it's pretty heavy stuff, you know. I mean, like if I could like make enough money or be financially competent enough to get these people out of poverty and get them into a good place, then that would be I could personally ensure their well-being on some level, and it'd be like, oh, I feel good. It's tough work, you know. Some of them don't work out, but like most of them get a place that they can keep, and like they live much better lives than they are now, off the streets at least, and maybe off drugs too, completely, or a lot less than before, maybe. That would be like one thing. And if I could possibly be influential and like convince people to vote for governments that actually manage public morality enough and giving people their just dues, and caring for the suffering in a more appropriate manner that is spiritually, like the spirit of the method is appropriate, then these people wouldn't suffer. And I know it's doable on some level because I remember back in the day it was definitely done this way. So it's not like I'm failing because it's impossible and so on. I'm failing and I know it's doable, basically. So what does it say about my competency and my capabilities and so on being so nil that my mind, which is my best asset, basically, I think personally, is useless, and my entrepreneurialism is nil, and or nada, and the best I can do is give consolation on occasion to the random passing by homeless person, and so on. It doesn't feel like I'm giving much, you know, but I'm giving more than other people do for these suffering people. And it's like, okay, and like a God that could snap his fingers and fix the problem on some level would make me a lot happier in a way, because it's a tough thing for a God to restrain himself, knowing the harm that will befall people because of it, so that something beautiful can emerge out of it. Something more beautiful than the alternative. So there's like heights and lows, heights and depths. And I just don't like the depths. What can I say? And I'm worried that I'm going to be part of those depths and like pass away alone, poor, unknown, and miserable. And even if I get a miracle to save me and so on, what if the people that I'm living around right now who face the similar situation because of the mismanagement of the government and so on? Like, why does God allow socialism to exist, basically? It's kind of one way of putting it, almost. You know what I mean? But this is the thing. Theory is all well and good when you're well fed, you're comfortable, you're safe, and you're free. But the reality of situations and the impacts of behaviors and decisions really screams and smashes your head to get your attention. In that sort of Thomas Sowell, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Yeah. And I've never been someone who's been a very good student. I mean, I was proud when I've got all B's in my classes one semester, or whatever they're called, period of study. I can't remember what they're called. I think we got 3 or 4 of them. But I got all B's in one quarter of a school year, and I was really proud because I worked hard and I was in a good situation that I wasn't in before, and so on. So it's like, okay, but I've always prided myself in terms of my intellectual honesty when it comes to things that I'm actually interested in on some level. And what's always interested me is the management of society or groups of people for the best well-being of those people. The most freedom, the most morality, the most purpose, the most financial well-being, the most safety. Like it doesn't have to be all of those all the way at the same time, but it has to be some combination that maximizes all of them to a degree that is acceptable to the people that I would try and manage on some level. And the thing I'm learning is I'm not a very good earner, I'm not a very good resource getter, I'm not a very charismatic person. And it's like, okay, where do I go from there? In the internet age, I'm not charismatic, so where do I go from there? If I'm trying to make videos for people to watch, and if I'm not a smart businessman or merchant in the physical world, then and I don't even have the means to get there, even if I was competent at it. And like the government literally gives foreigners. The government literally pays foreigners wages for the business, so the business automatically decides to hire foreigners over Canadian citizens of my province. So that minimum wage job thing, even if I could manage it and wasn't so bad at it when I was like a younger guy that I could barely function for like 2 years before crashing out. Even if I wasn't that bad at it because of my autism and so on, um, I couldn't get a job probably because the government literally pays for a business to hire people from across the world instead of me as a native citizen of Canada. And it's like, who designed this system, right? And for a God to restrain himself, it's like, okay, he accepts limitations for the sake of being in camaraderie with our limitations. Okay, that's actually something that I can appreciate, and that like maybe I can provide something that he wanted me to provide, or he needed me to do something to get a certain outcome in a certain way, particularly, you know. So that's a possible thing. That's something to look forward to. But I'm not feeling it right now, you know? I mean, they talk of spiritual dry seasons and so on, and I know Mother Teresa went through like 40 years of this, but she had like a community of people who were mission oriented and they were doing their best too, and so on. You know. So I'm feeling that as a lone voice in the wilderness, sort of, in a way. Um, you know. I mean, I got my friends and neighbors and stuff like that a little bit, but it just drains the soul and so on. And I want to escape my situation and look back at it as my time in the trenches, so to speak. The futility of World War One being a very poignant um, marker of what I'm feeling right now, and then get out of there, get out of here, and live the good life, and possibly become influential and famous, and basically just use this experience to never forget the necessity, vitality, and importance of a well-managed society and so on, and to fight for those who can't fight for themselves particularly much in the face of overwhelming socialist mismanagement of society and the dysfunction and destruction they cause and so on. But if God were a pantheon God, then I could at least rally to his cause and say, whatever his failings are, it's because he doesn't have enough power, so I'll give him my power. You know. Maybe a self-restraining God kind of does something a little bit similar in a way. You know, he lets us join our capabilities to his, in a way, even if he doesn't need it, and he could baby everyone as much as they wanted and so on, for the sake of their internal, intrinsic motivations as men or women, to be rewarded through progress, in a sense of like, progress is more important than destination to the average person. But I'm not feeling progress, I'm not feeling destination, I'm not anywhere around there. Yeah. So it's like, okay. Really feeling the burn. What can I say? Anyway, sorry if this is depressing, but this is just the fact of life that I'm dealing with right now, and so I'm thinking about this stuff.